I'm Hannah Reynolds, 29 years old, and just last spring I was being considered for a senior leadership role at one of Seattle's fastest-growing tech startups. I had a waterfront apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, a man who knew how to make me laugh, and a life that finally felt like it was mine. Then came the crash metal on metal rain on glass silence. When I woke up in that hospital bed, barely breathing, I heard my parents ask the doctor to stop trying. "She's just a burden," my father said. "Let her go." Before I get into what happened after that, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you believe that the people who are meant to love us should never have to be begged to care. I was raised in Olympia, Washington, the oldest of two. My parents, Robert and Linda Reynolds, always had a way of making things look perfect from the outside. Dad was a partner at a downtown law firm. Mom ran a designer home goods store and made a habit of hosting fundraising galas she rarely donated to. They played the roles well, matching cars, staged Christmas photos, the works. But love wasn't something that was spoken in our home. Not to me, at least. When my brother Zach came along 6 years after me, it was like the family rewrote itself. He could do no wrong. If I brought home straight A's, they'd ask why I hadn't taken on extra credit. Zach made honor roll once, and they bought him a new mountain bike. Mom called him her little prince, and Dad used words like promising young man even when Zach got suspended for skipping class. Meanwhile, I was told to be quiet, be useful, and stop making things about myself. The only real softness in my life came from my grandmother. My dad's mother, June Reynolds, lived about an hour outside the city in a little craftsman home with yellow shutters and a blueberry bush that grew wild across the back fence. Every summer she'd have me for weeks at a time. We baked banana bread, picked wildflowers, and read books aloud in the evenings with the windows open and the crickets humming. "You've got a light in you, Hannah," she'd tell me, brushing my hair back with those dry, work-worn hands. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise, especially not your father. He means well, but he forgot a long time ago what matters." I think she always knew what I was up against even before I did. When I turned 18, just before I left for college, Grandma June pulled me aside after Sunday lunch. She was folding linens in the dining room, and without looking up, she said, "Someday everything I have will be yours. I've made sure of it." I hugged her a little confused but didn't press. I didn't care about the house or the land. I just felt seen. College was the first time I could really breathe. I got a partial scholarship to Washington State, but it didn't cover everything. My parents told me I was on my own. They called it a character-building opportunity. Meanwhile, they paid Zach's full tuition to a private school out east without blinking. So I juggled jobs. Mornings behind a coffee counter, nights at a diner, and weekends doing data entry. I still graduated with honors and barely any debt. That's how I got into tech. I started out doing admin work for a medical software company in Seattle. Within 2 years, I was managing a team. I'd built something for myself, not flashy but steady. I even met someone, Ryan. He was a back-end engineer who understood silence, respected time, and always walked me to my car. After 2 years, we were talking about houses. I'd never let myself dream that far before. The day of the accident started with a product launch and ended with champagne by the waterfront. Ryan toasted to our future. I remember how warm the restaurant lights felt as I pulled out of the parking lot and waved goodbye. I said I'd text when I got home. I never did. What I remember next comes in pieces. Rain, headlights, the wheel jerking beneath my hands, glass breaking. Then nothing. When I opened my eyes 3 days later, the room smelled like bleach and plastic tubing. My legs were heavy. My right arm was in a sling. A nurse leaned over me and said my name like she wasn't sure I'd hear it. And somewhere down the hall, I heard my parents' voices, cool, collected, and unforgiving. "Just let her go." That's where everything started to change. I didn't move. The machines beside my bed kept a steady rhythm, and the room smelled like alcohol wipes and laundry starch. But my mind was wide awake. I'd opened my eyes once earlier that day, just long enough for the nurse to call in the attending physician. She'd given me ice chips, said something about my boyfriend being here constantly, and then the exhaustion pulled me back under. But now I was alert, just very, very still. The voices outside my room were muffled, but unmistakable. My father's voice was low and clipped, like he was already annoyed. My mother's tone was smooth, measured the same voice she used at charity luncheons and school conferences. I heard a third voice, Dr. Carter, the trauma surgeon. His voice had a different texture, patient, but firm. They stepped into the room. I didn't open my eyes. Something told me not to. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was the way their shoes paused, just short of my bed. "No change," my mother said. I recognized that cadence disappointment, not concern. "She woke up briefly this morning," Dr. Carter explained, "but she's still heavily sedated for pain. Her injuries are extensive, but the outlook is good with the right treatment plan." "And what exactly does that involve?" my father asked. "We'd like to understand what we're dealing with, doctor." Carter went on describing what I already knew from earlier multiple surgeries, months of rehabilitation, significant costs. My mother exhaled sharply through her nose. My father didn't say anything for a moment. Then came the words that made my stomach clench. "Doctor, I appreciate your work, but let's be realistic. Hannah has always been difficult. She pushed us away years ago. If we're honest, she's been a burden for a long time." I focused on keeping my breathing steady, shallow. My fingertips curled slightly under the blanket. Dr. Carter's tone changed. "Mr. Reynolds," he said carefully, "your daughter's injuries are serious but not insurmountable. With time and care, she can make a full recovery." My mother cut in. "We're not saying do nothing, but maybe we don't need to pursue extraordinary measures. She wouldn't want to live that way, not if it meant being a burden." My father added, "We're already dealing with her grandmother's passing and the estate matters. There's a lot happening right now. That's how I found out Grandma June was gone. No one had told me. Not a message, not a visit. She was my only real family, and they hadn't even mentioned it." Dr. Carter kept his voice professional. "If money is the concern, our social worker can walk you through assistance programs. It's not the money," my father said flatly. "It's the principle. She wanted independence. Let her have it." They stepped back from the bed. I could hear papers rustling, shoes turning, the soft click of a watch band. My mother's voice again, this time quieter. "If there are any major changes in her condition, please call us. Otherwise, we'll need to focus on the funeral and finalizing June's affairs." They left. The door closed behind them. I stayed frozen for a moment, then opened my eyes. My heart monitor had sped up, and within seconds a nurse walked in. She was young, early 30s maybe, with a name badge that read Stephanie. She glanced at the monitor, then looked at my face. Her expression softened. "You're awake," she said, voice low. "Try to stay calm, okay?" "They want me to die," I whispered. "My parents." Stephanie didn't correct me. She didn't pretend she hadn't heard. She just pulled up a chair. "I shouldn't say this, but what I heard, what they said, that's not okay." I felt tears on my cheeks before I realized I was crying. It wasn't the pain. It wasn't even the grief. It was that hollow ache of knowing you were never really wanted. I told Stephanie everything, not just about the accident, but about Zach and the way the scales had always been tilted in our house, about being invisible unless I was achieving something useful, about Grandma June and the books and the garden, and the way she'd once whispered, "You deserve more than they'll ever give you." And now she was gone, without warning, without goodbye. Stephanie handed me tissues and stayed until her shift ended. As she stood up to leave, I asked for one favor. "If they come back, don't tell them I was awake. Please. Just let them think I'm still out of it. I need time to figure things out." She hesitated. Then she nodded. "I can't lie, but I can be vague. I'll make sure the staff is discreet." That night I didn't sleep much. My arm throbbed, my ribs ached, but mostly my mind was racing. I kept thinking about Grandma June's voice, the way she'd said, "It'll all be yours one day." What did they mean by estate matters? Why were they suddenly so invested in what happened to me? I had no answers, just suspicion. The next morning, Thomas showed up. He looked tired, dark shadows under his eyes, but when he saw me awake, he let out a breath and sat down beside me. "I thought I lost you," he said, taking my hand. "When the hospital called, they didn't think you'd make it through the night." I told him everything, about the accident, about what I heard in the hospital room, about Grandma June, about my parents' plan to let me go. His jaw tightened as I spoke, and when I finished, he said, "We'll figure it out. Whatever you need, I'm here." 3 days later, I had enough strength to look at my phone. It was the first time I'd been able to sit up long enough to scroll. That's when I found the email from a law firm, sent 3 days before my accident. The subject line was Estate of June Reynolds, urgent contact request. It was addressed to me, not to my parents, not to Zach. The message was simple. June Reynolds had named me the sole beneficiary of her estate, including her home, 2 rental properties, and a large investment portfolio. The total value was over $4 million. I stared at the screen, numb. Thomas read the message with me. "They knew," I said quietly. "They must have found out. That's why they're hovering." He nodded. "And hoping you wouldn't survive." I asked him to call the lawyer. Tell her I was recovering, that I couldn't speak yet, but I was interested in discussing the estate. I needed to understand what was happening, what my rights were, and why my parents were circling like vultures. As he stepped into the hallway to make the call, I laid back against the pillows. The monitor beeped beside me. They'd tried to erase me before I could even claim what was mine. But I was still here, and I wasn't going anywhere. Stephanie was the one who let me know they were coming back. It had been 7 days since my parents first stepped into my hospital room and told the doctor to let me die. In that time, I'd had another surgery, started light physical therapy, and worked with Thomas to quietly coordinate with the lawyer Rachel Wilson, handling my grandmother's estate. "They're meeting with Dr. Carter now," Stephanie said quietly, pulling the curtain back just enough to check the hallway. "Still no idea you're conscious, far as they know." I gave her a small nod and shifted deeper into the bed. The bruises on my ribs still flared when I moved wrong, and the brace around my leg made the simplest adjustments a task, but I managed to ease myself into the position we'd practiced, eyes mostly closed, breathing slow features, slack. Thomas squeezed my hand before stepping out of the room. That was our signal. A moment later, the door opened. I heard 3 sets of footsteps. One was lighter, precise, my mother, one heavier and steady, my father. The third had more weight in the heel. That one was Zach. "As you can see, she's stable." Dr. Carter set his tone flat but polite. "She's experiencing intermittent consciousness, but with the extent of her injuries, we're still monitoring closely." "And what's the outlook?" my mother asked. "Will she recover fully?" "It's too soon to say. With traumatic brain injuries, timelines vary. Some patients recover completely. Others take longer." "How long before you'll know for sure?" my father asked. "These things can't be rushed," Dr. Carter replied. "Your daughter's body and brain need time to heal." Zach stepped closer to the bed. I could tell by the shift in the air near my side. "She looks awful," he said, not quietly enough. "She was in a car that flipped 3 times down an embankment," Dr. Carter said dryly. "Most people wouldn't look their best under those circumstances." There was a short silence, and then I felt someone take my hand. The pressure was awkward, unfamiliar. It was Zach. I fought the urge to pull away. "Can she hear us?" he asked. "Possibly," Dr. Carter said. "Many coma patients report later that they were aware." We encourage family to speak freely to their loved ones, regardless of how unresponsive they appear. "We'll need a moment alone with our daughter," my father said. There was a pause. Then Dr. Carter responded, "Of course. I'll be just outside." The door clicked shut. No one spoke for a long time. "This complicates things," my father said eventually. "The lawyer refuses to move forward until she hears directly from Hannah." "How's that supposed to happen if she's unconscious?" Zach asked. "It doesn't," my mother replied. "That's the point. If she remains incapacitated," my father continued, "I'll petition for conservatorship. As next of kin, I'll be granted access to make decisions on her behalf, including matters related to the estate." "And if she wakes up?" Zach asked, quieter now. "Let's hope she doesn't remember much." "She might," Zach said. "She might already know." "She doesn't," my father snapped. "Rachel Wilson told us she hadn't reached Hannah before the accident. And even if she had, people with brain trauma often have gaps in memory." There was a rustle of papers, someone opening a folder. "We'll simply express concern about her confusion," my mother said. "It's not unusual. And we tell her that June intended the estate for Zach." "She left it all to Hannah," Zach said. "That's what Rachel said. That was a mistake," my father replied. "An emotional choice. Hannah was always sentimental. If she remains in this state, the doctors will recommend long-term care. We get a court-appointed guardian, me. Then it won't matter what she remembers." I stayed completely still, letting every word sink in. They weren't just circling around my recovery, they were making plans to erase me. "I still don't understand why she left everything to Hannah," Zach muttered. "After everything I've done for this family, all the work I've put into my career." Hannah barely visited her. That one almost made me react, because it wasn't true. I had visited Grandma June every month, even during deadlines and long weeks at the office. I brought her new books, fixed the leaky faucet in her kitchen, helped her get groceries when her knees started to give out. It was my parents and Zach who stopped showing up. "Your grandmother always had a soft spot for her," my mother said. "But that doesn't matter now. What matters," my father added, "is making sure this doesn't get tangled in court. We need to find a different attorney, someone who will represent our interests. Rachel Wilson is clearly biased. She's protecting the will," Zach said. "She's standing in the way," my father corrected. "I've already contacted Harrison. He's drawing up the conservatorship paperwork. As long as Hannah stays in this condition, we have a case." There was a pause long enough that I thought they might be finished. Then my mother spoke again. "We'll need to appear concerned. The doctors need to believe we're hopeful." Her voice was calm, like she was planning a fundraiser. Their chairs scraped back. Footsteps again. The door opened. They left. 10 seconds passed before the door opened again. Thomas stepped in, his eyes on mine. I opened them fully now and took a breath. "Did you get it all?" I asked quietly. He lifted his phone. "Every word." "Send it to Rachel," I said. "Tell her to add it to the file." Thomas sent the file. Then he sat beside me and finally fully held my hand. "They really are something else," he said. I didn't answer right away. My mind was racing, not with panic, but with plans. "I need to get out of here," I said after a moment, "before they figure out I'm not brain dead and try to rush that conservatorship." He nodded. "We'll make a plan. We'll get you home, whatever you need." I turned my head toward the window. There was still light outside. The rain had stopped. I was in pain. My body felt stitched together with wires and pins. But I was awake. I was aware. And I wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. I didn't sleep that night. The pain meds made everything fuzzy at the edges, but my thoughts kept looping through the same points: my parents' voices, Zach's comments, the paperwork they thought they could push through before I woke up. They thought time was on their side. They thought I wouldn't remember a thing. By morning, I'd made up my mind. Thomas came in early, holding coffee and a printed copy of the email from Rachel Wilson, the one that confirmed everything Grandma June had left behind, and that it was all meant for me. "I called her last night," he said quietly. She's ready to help. She's already reviewed the file. She thinks your parents caught wind of the will before you ever got the email." I nodded. They didn't come to the hospital for me. They came to see if I'd already died. There wasn't anything else to say. That afternoon, Stephanie wheeled in a tablet Thomas had set up with extra security. He'd created a new email address for me, one my family wouldn't recognize. We kept our messages brief. Rachel responded within an hour. Her voice on the call was measured and steady. "Your grandmother left a detailed will. You are the sole beneficiary with full control over the estate." She paused. "Your father came to my office, claimed you'd given him authority to act on your behalf." Thomas stood nearby, arms crossed. "I didn't respond," I said. "I wasn't even awake. Rachel confirmed it. That's why I refused to proceed. Your grandmother anticipated the possibility of pushback. She left a personal letter for you." There was a rustle of papers on her end, then her voice returned. "I'll bring it to you directly. I won't send it through any channels your family could intercept. Until then, we keep everything quiet." After we hung up, Thomas sat next to me. "They think you're helpless," he said. "Then I stay that way," I replied. "For now." Dr. Carter had already agreed to keep details about my cognitive state vague in the charts. Nothing dishonest, just carefully worded updates about sedation, rest, fatigue. It bought us time. Over the next 10 days, I focused on recovery. Each morning started with blood work vitals and movement therapy. There were 2 more procedures, one for internal bleeding that hadn't fully resolved, and another to set the pins in my leg. The pain was constant. The work was slow. But every time I sat up without assistance or made it halfway across the room with a walker, I felt something building. One morning after a particularly long session, Marcus, my physical therapist, helped me back into bed and said, "You're pushing harder than anyone I've seen." I didn't explain why. I just said, "I've got plans." 2 days later, Rachel arrived. She came alone, carrying a flat envelope and a file folder. Stephanie had arranged for us to meet in one of the private consultation rooms near the far wing of the floor. Thomas helped me into the wheelchair. Rachel greeted us both with a quiet nod. We kept the visit short. She handed me the letter firsthand written in my grandmother's careful script. "My dearest Hannah, if you're reading this, it means I've gone on ahead. I hope you'll forgive me for not saying more while I was here. I wanted to spare you the burden of expectation. Everything I've built, all that I've saved, is now yours. Use it wisely. Use it with heart. Your father and brother have lost sight of what matters, but you haven't. You've always known what kindness looks like. That's why this legacy belongs to you. Take it and live freely. Love always. Grandma June." I read it once, then again. Rachel waited before opening the folder. "These are the asset documents," she said. "The house, the rental properties, the accounts. We've already started the transfer process. I'll need your signature on several of these to make it official." Thomas moved the tablet into position. I signed each one carefully. "Your father's conservatorship petition is being filed through another attorney," she added. "He's trying to move quickly. But your medical reports, especially Dr. Carter's assessment, will make it difficult." I nodded. "Let them keep thinking I'm not all here. We'll finish everything before they catch on." Rachel smiled slightly. "Then we stay quiet until the papers are finalized. I'll call you once everything clears." She left shortly after, and Thomas wheeled me back to my room. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd signed the letter. Live freely. The next morning, the hospital's billing office called. A woman named Gloria explained the payment plans available. Her voice was kind, but cautious. "Your parents mentioned they wouldn't be contributing toward the balance," she said, reading directly from her notes. "They stated that you chose financial independence, and therefore the responsibility is yours." "I understand," I said calmly. "Can I follow up next week with a payment plan?" "Of course," she said, sounding almost surprised. "Just let us know." I hung up staring at the ceiling. My parents hadn't just given up on me. They'd done it out loud, on paper. Thomas came in later that afternoon with more documents from Rachel. One by one, we moved through the signatures, asset titles, banking transitions, trust protections. When the last form loaded on the screen, I paused. "This is the end of it?" I asked. "It is," he said. I signed. That night, Stephanie came in for one of her last shifts before changing rotations. "You look different," she said, adjusting the IV stand. "Stronger." "No," she said, smiling. "Ready." I nodded. "I'm getting out of here." Dr. Carter approved my discharge 2 days later. I still couldn't walk without assistance, but the wounds had stabilized, and the home health plan was in place. The physical therapy would continue on an outpatient basis. "Where are you going to stay?" he asked during his final check-in. "With me," Thomas answered. "We've already made the adjustments. Ramps, a hospital bed in the guest room, handrails installed in the bathroom." He hadn't waited to ask, he'd just done it. On Thursday morning, I left the hospital through a private exit. Stephanie walked beside me until the van doors closed. "You'll let me know how it turns out," she asked. "I will." Thomas held the door as I was lifted inside. Outside, the clouds were thinning. The sky was finally clearing. We were quiet on the drive. When we reached his apartment, he opened the front door and rolled me in. The furniture had been rearranged. My favorite blanket from my old place was folded neatly across the chair. "Welcome home," he said. I looked around the space that would be mine for now. The quiet, the air, the freedom. It was just the beginning. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not hospital quiet where machines hummed and carts rolled down polished floors, but the soft living quiet of a home. Thomas had opened the window slightly. I could hear the wind through the trees and the faint sound of a neighbor's dog barking 2 houses down. He showed me the bedroom first. He'd turned his home office into a recovery suite hospital bedside table with drawers. Even the recliner from my old apartment had been brought in and placed by the window. He'd installed grab bars in the bathroom and replaced all the doorknobs with levers. There was a jar of mint tea bags on the kitchen counter and a shelf in the fridge labeled with my name. "You thought of everything I said." He shrugged, setting my overnight bag on a bench near the wall. "You'd have done the same." We moved into a rhythm quickly. Morning started with physical therapy, stretches, slow steps with the walker, gradual shifts in balance. The therapist came 3 times a week. On the other days, I did the routines on my own with Thomas nearby in case I needed help. By the second week, I could move between rooms without calling for him. Afternoons were spent at the dining table, which had become my workspace. Rachel continued to guide the estate transition. She came by once to go over the documents in person, and after that we spoke over the phone almost daily. Each conversation moved us further along. "The properties are now fully in your name," she told me during one call. "The main house, the lake cottage, and the condo in Florida. All 3 recorded and confirmed." "What about the accounts we're working through the investments? They're more complex due to the portfolio size, but everything is secure." Zach and my parents still believed I was recovering in a facility under full-time supervision. Rachel hadn't told them otherwise. Neither had Dr. Carter or the hospital. Everyone on my side had been careful to maintain the appearance of limited awareness and slow progress. That illusion was our protection while we moved quietly in the background. One evening after signing off on another round of account transfers, I turned to Thomas. "I want to sell it all," I said. He paused halfway through slicing vegetables at the counter. "All of it. The properties, the investments. I want it liquid. I want to put distance between me and anything they think they can still claim." He leaned his hands on the counter and looked at me. "Even the house, the one with the porch swing you used to talk about." I love that place, but I don't want to live in the shadow of what they thought they could steal." Rachel was surprised when I told her, "Most people in your position would hold on to the assets. I don't want the weight," I said. "I want control." She agreed to move quickly. Over the next 3 weeks, her team coordinated listing showings and negotiated offers. The main house sold first to a couple from Portland, who offered cash for a 30-day close. The lake property went to a young family relocating from Denver. The condo in Florida closed the following week. In parallel, Rachel's firm liquidated the investment accounts and moved the funds into secured holdings under my name alone. The total came in just under $4.3 million, slightly less than the full value, but more than enough for the life I was building. The first thing I did was pay the hospital bill. Nearly $390,000, every scan, surgery, and specialist visit covered in one transaction. Gloria from billing called personally to confirm. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said over the phone. "We don't see this often. I hope your recovery continues." The second thing I did was establish a patient assistance fund in Grandma June's name. $500,000 managed through the hospital foundation, earmarked for trauma patients with no family support. Dr. Carter came by to thank me in person. "This will help so many," he said. "People who would have otherwise slipped through the cracks." "I know what that feels like," I told him. In the background, Rachel continued monitoring the conservatorship petition my father had filed. The hearing date had been set, but we hadn't shared any updates with the court yet. Rachel was building the case carefully, Dr. Carter's cognitive evaluations, Stephanie's statements about my alertness, and the complete file of property transactions and estate transfers. "They think they still have time," she said. "We haven't corrected them yet." "I want it that way," I replied. "I want to be the one who ends it, on my terms." Thomas closed his laptop across the table. "Then it's time." He was right. We drafted the letter that afternoon. Rachel sent it on official letterhead the next morning. "To Robert and Linda Reynolds and Zachary Reynolds, Amanda Reynolds requests your presence at a meeting regarding the estate of June Reynolds. Thursday, soon p.m., Wilson Law Offices, downtown Seattle." "They'll come," I said, folding the letter back into the envelope. "They won't be able to resist." Thomas looked across the table at me. "You ready for this?" I glanced at the documents spread out between us. The finalized transfers, the donation receipt, the signed medical evaluations, and the statement from the therapist confirming my recovery progress. "I've been ready." The night before the meeting, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The walker had been retired. I was using a cane now, a carved wood handle warm to the touch. My legs still ached in the evening, but I was steady on my feet. I'd gone from broken to standing, and the next day I would face them as someone they never expected to see again. The morning of the meeting, I got up early. Thomas had laid out my clothes the night before, a charcoal gray suit, soft fabric, easy to move in. The shoes were flat but polished. I sat at the small vanity in the corner of the room and used concealer to cover the faint scar on my forehead. The cane I chose was walnut-stained, carved with a simple wave near the handle. It had weight. Rachel had arranged the conference room herself. She placed me at the head of the table with her seated beside me. Thomas stood just behind us, out of the way, but close enough. At exactly 2 p.m., her assistant opened the door. My parents walked in first. My mother wore a pale blazer, the kind she usually saved for fundraisers. My father's expression was unreadable. Jaw tight, eyes sharp. Zach followed behind a step slower, like he wasn't sure what kind of meeting this was. They saw me, and they stopped. My mother was the first to speak. "Hannah," she said, voice light controlled, "you look wonderful." She stepped forward slightly, arms outstretched. "We've been so worried. The rehabilitation center wouldn't give us any updates." I didn't rise. I didn't offer a smile. "Please sit down." They took their seats. Zach settled in last, glancing between Rachel and me, then toward Thomas. I wasn't aware this would be a legal meeting, my father said, gesturing to Rachel. Given the nature of the discussion, we felt it was appropriate, Rachel said. I'm representing Hannah Reynolds. My father gave a stiff nod. We've been trying to locate her for weeks. The hospital wouldn't release information. I didn't reply right away. I looked at him for a long moment. Strange, I said finally. You showed little concern when you asked Dr. Carter to stop treatment. My mother blinked. My father said you were unconscious. You couldn't have heard that. I was awake for the entire conversation, I said. I remember every word, including what you said about Grandma June's estate. Zach shifted in his chair. Their attorney, a man named Harrison Peters, leaned forward. Perhaps we should focus on the estate matters. Ms. Reynolds has clearly been through a traumatic event. Memory can be inconsistent in these cases. My memory is fine, I said, but if you'd prefer evidence, we can provide that. Thomas reached into his bag and pulled out a tablet. He tapped the screen once, and the room filled with voices, my father's, my mother's, Zach's, all clearly discussing conservatorship, the inheritance, and whether I would remember anything. My mother covered her mouth. My father leaned forward trying to reach for the device. Thomas slid it just out of reach. That's illegal, my father snapped. You can't record someone without consent. Actually, Rachel said calmly, Washington is a two-party consent state, but the recordings were taken in Ohio, where only one party needs to be aware, and Thomas was present. Zach looked down at his lap. This isn't blackmail, I said. This is a courtesy, so you understand how much I know. My father turned toward me. You were in a coma. You're not in any condition to manage this kind of transition. I've been declared medically competent by 3 separate specialists, I replied. All documentation has been submitted to the court, and the estate has already been fully transferred into my name. My mother blinked. That's impossible. The probate process was completed weeks ago, Rachel said. The estate was distributed per June Reynolds's wishes. My father's face darkened. You had no right to liquidate family property. I had every right, I said. I sold the house, the lake property, the condo, and all the investments. They've all been converted to cash. None of it is in accounts you can access. None of it is tied to you. The silence stretched across the room. You can't do that, Zach said finally. That was our family's legacy. I've worked my whole life. I looked at him. You didn't even visit her. He didn't respond. My mother reached for her purse, then stopped. Why would you do this? She asked quietly. We're still your family. You left me to die in a hospital bed, I said. You told the doctor I was a burden. You refused to pay for my care, and you filed for control of my estate before I was out of surgery. Harrison Peters leaned toward my father, speaking softly. My father waved him off. We'll contest this, my father said. The will, the sales there are grounds, Rachel responded. You can try. But June Reynolds's will was legally sound. She included explicit reasoning for excluding you. Your son received a minor trust. The rest was left to Hannah. My father turned to me again. You've made a mistake. I made a choice, I said. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a manila envelope. I slid it across the table. These are copies of the recordings, medical statements, staff witness reports, and transaction records. If you attempt to challenge any part of the process or contact me again, these documents will be submitted to the State Bar Association, your firm's ethics board, and the media. My mother's hand tightened on the edge of the table. This is blackmail, my father said again. No, I said, standing with the help of my cane. This is a boundary. I paused at the door. I don't hate you. I'm not angry anymore. But I see you clearly now, and I don't want you in my life. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Thomas followed. Rachel gathered her files and offered a final nod to the room before exiting behind us. As we walked toward the elevator, I heard my mother's voice quiet and cracking, and the sharp sound of a folder hitting the table. But I didn't look back. The air outside the law office felt cooler than I expected. Rachel stayed behind to finalize the last details, and Thomas and I walked in silence back to the car. The wind moved through the trees, and I could feel every shift in the light. In the parking lot, I paused. "That's it," I said. Thomas looked at me. "It is." But it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the beginning of something I hadn't dared to imagine before. The next few weeks passed quietly. There were no phone calls, no emails. Rachel confirmed that the family hadn't filed any legal motions. The letter I left behind, the documents, the recordings, none of it had been challenged. I spent my mornings finishing physical therapy. The cane stayed near the door, though I didn't need it much anymore. In the afternoons, I worked on something else. I met with a consultant, then a small team of developers and care advocates. Together, we started drafting plans for a company, a platform built from my experience as a patient, one that could monitor subtle changes in trauma recovery data points that nurses might miss signals that patients couldn't explain. We named it Resilience Technologies. The foundation came next. I contacted the hospital's administrator and arranged for the endowment to be set up in Grandma June's name. The funds would support trauma patients with no family support hospital, stays therapy, long-term care. When I called Dr. Carter to let him know, he didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. "I don't think you know what this will mean to people," he said. "It's remarkable." "I know what it meant to me," I said. One afternoon, Rachel came by with the final financial report. "With the expedited sales and fees, you're looking at just under $4.3 million all secured," she said, placing the folder in front of me. "It's done." I signed the last line on the last page. "Thank you," I told her. "Your grandmother would have been proud." I nodded but didn't answer. Some things didn't need to be said out loud. I used part of the remaining funds to buy a home just outside the city. Nothing grand. 3 bedrooms, a small garden, and a porch with room for a swing. Thomas helped me move in. On the first morning, he brought over my grandmother's book collection, boxes of hardcovers and paperbacks that had been stored away since the sale. We spent the afternoon arranging them in the living room. "You're starting over," he said. "Finally," I said. We both stood there not needing to say more. Weeks later, a letter arrived forwarded from Rachel's office. The envelope was plain, the handwriting unfamiliar. Inside was a short note. "Hannah, we didn't expect things to turn out this way. It's clear now there's nothing left to say. Zach." There was no return address. I folded the letter once and placed it in a drawer. Rachel called a few days later. "Your father has stepped down from his firm. Officially, it's a leave of absence. And my mother's still hosting fundraisers, still writing holiday newsletters." I thanked her and hung up. At night, the house was quiet. I found myself drawn to the back porch. I'd planted roses along the edge near the fence. They were still small, still growing. Sometimes I'd stand out there in the dark and remember the hospital room, the monitors, the beeping, the silence that followed their voices. The silence that told me everything. Now I was living a life they couldn't touch, not just because of the money or the distance, but because I no longer carried their story with me. I had written my own. 6 months after that final meeting with my family, I stood in the sunlit conference room of Resilience Technologies, watching my team review the first round of trial data. Thomas stood by the whiteboard, explaining a chart that showed how our early prototype had already flagged warning signs for 3 recovering patients, signs that might have gone unnoticed until it was too late. Across the table, our lead nurse consultant nodded her pen, tapping gently on the report. I looked around the room, people I'd chosen not just for their skill, but for their compassion. People who believed that care shouldn't depend on whether you had the right last name or a family willing to show up. Later that day, I walked through the garden behind my house, the one I'd planted myself. The roses along the fence were blooming soft pink edged in white. I'd chosen them for Grandma June. She'd loved roses. She always said a garden didn't need to be big, just loved. Inside the living room held books she'd passed down to me. I kept her photo on a small table by the window. No frame, just a quiet presence. That evening, a few close friends came over, Thomas, of course, and Stephanie, now a head nurse at the trauma center. Dr. Carter brought a pie his wife had baked. Rachel stopped by with a bottle of sparkling cider. We shared a meal in the kitchen, talking and laughing, the kind of easy warmth I'd never known growing up. When the plates were cleared, I stood up and raised my glass. To unexpected blessings, I said. To the people who hold us up when we can't stand on our own. And to finding family, not always the one we're born into, but the one we build. Later, when the house was quiet again, I sat outside on the back porch and looked up at the stars. The air was still the night clear. I thought about that hospital room, the beeping machines, the pain, the moment I realized the people who raised me would rather bury me than love me. And I thought about what came after. Not revenge, not even justice, really, just peace. And a life I made from the pieces they tried to leave behind. What Grandma June gave me wasn't just money or property. It was the permission to step out of their shadow, to stop begging for space at a table that was never built for me. And the greatest gift of all. Learning that dignity isn't something others can give or take. It's something we claim when we decide our story doesn't end where they wanted it to. So if you're listening, whether you're healing, rebuilding, or just trying to remember who you are, I hope you know this. You're allowed to walk away from people who don't see your worth. You're allowed to build a new life, even if it looks nothing like the one you came from. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply to keep going. Thanks for being here with me. If this story meant something to you, I'd love for you to share it or leave a comment with your own. And if you haven't already, feel free to subscribe. We're all finding our way. Sometimes hearing each other's stories makes that path just a little clearer.